Nos fins de semana de verão, milhares de cariocas saem de suas casas nos mais distantes subúrbios em busca de lazer.
Welcome once again to Cinemaholics, where we talk about the biggest and best films coming to theaters and streaming online. From the San Francisco Bay Area, I am Jon Negroni, chief editor of Cinemaholics, also a film critic for Awards Watch, The Spool, and The Young Folks. From Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, he is a pop culture writer for Cinema Blend, and it's Will Ashton.
Hello, John.
You can find more episodes of Cinemaholics, including our full archive, on cinemaholics.com, including written reviews and other bonus content. You can write into the show anytime by sending us an email. Hit us up, cinemaholicspodcast@gmail.com. And if you'd like to support our show, help us keep the fun going, please head on over to patreon.com/cinemaholics. Consider becoming one of our monthly patrons. And you can also check out our Cinemaholics merch on our website, cinemaholics.com. If you're interested in a hoodie, mug, t-shirt, whatever you like, links to everything I just mentioned are in the show notes as usual. Well, this week we have a bunch of movies to talk about, some big ones, some little ones, but we're not even covering, I think, half of the new releases of this past week. It is pretty insane.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, but of late, it seems like either 3 movies come out and we have to scramble for what we can cover, or it's just like, hey, here are 20 movies all in 1 week.
Yeah.
Have fun.
Have fun.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, we're going to be talking about In the Heights, of course, the big release from Warner Brothers, which is now in theaters. We're also going to be talking about a Netflix movie called Wish Dragon, an animated Sony movie, and then a few indie films, Holler, Censor, The Misfits, that's all coming up. But some of the movies we aren't going to be covering, I do want to touch on them real fast. There is the Paramount Plus original Infinite, which just came out this past weekend, which is already gaining quite the reputation as being one of the biggest just misfires of 2021. It stars Mark Wahlberg, Dylan O'Brien, Lawrence Fishburne. And this movie, it's like a sci-fi kind of reincarnation movie, apparently, action movie.
Yeah.
And we had a feeling it was not going to go over super well. The marketing for it has been a complete hush. And they were not really releasing a lot of screeners to press. I mean, we kind of had a feeling that this was going to be not received well, and that appears to be the case after all.
Yeah, I mean, I felt kind of bad for it at first when Paramount unceremoniously just decided to make it a streaming-only title, and they didn't tell Antoine Fuqua or Mark Wahlberg until like the day of. And I was like, oh, that's real crummy. Like, that's a bad thing to do. It's not really good business. And it's like, I think Antoine Fuqua intended this to be a very theatrical film, so I also felt bad in that respect. But then, yeah, like when the word of mouth was pretty muted, and then the reviews came out, and they were all almost uniformly negative, I was like, well, maybe they just dodged a bullet. I don't know. Right?
Yeah, that is the reason that we ended up seeing The Misfits instead of this movie, because we didn't have any screeners, and I do have Paramount Plus, but there's just too many other movies to get to. There was also Queen Bees, the James Caan, Ellen Burstyn, and Margaret Christopher Lloyd movie. There was something called Achilles' Escape, which actually got pretty decent reviews. That's a festival release. There was Awake, the new Netflix movie with Gina Rodriguez, didn't get a lot of great reviews. And then finally, a movie you did manage to catch over the last week, Hitman's Wife's Bodyguard, the sequel to the first film, which we'll be talking about more next week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I've seen that one, but I'll keep mum for now.
Yeah, we did consider talking about it because it's kind of out right now. It's kind of a weird release strategy with that movie, but now we're going to save it for next week. Next week is going to be pretty stacked. Next week we'll see the release of Luca, as well as the Sparks Brothers, Rita Moreno, and I did manage to see Luca this past week, and very excited to talk about that new Pixar movie once we get the chance. But in terms of things we did see, Will Ashton, you saw a 1973 film that is finally out. That is finally like in all of its glory, from George A. Romero and screenwriter Wally Cook. What is the deal with this movie? Because a lot of people considered it lost, for many, many years. I don't think it was until, like the year we started this show that they discovered a print of this movie still exists, and it was restored in, I believe, a couple of years ago in this town. You might have heard of it, called Pittsburgh.
Oh, you better believe it. Yeah. The George A. Romero Foundation, I think maybe a year or so after he passed away, in honor to remember him, they decided to restore and then eventually release this lost film of his that, like you mentioned, initially was made in the 70s. But so essentially, basically what he was trying to do with this film was he was making, for I think the Lutheran Society, this educational film about the dangers of ageism and elder abuse. And they're just like, hey, George A. Romero, you're a famous filmmaker. Could you just put something together for us? And he's like, yeah, I think I can do something with this. Went a few months, made something, came back, and they're like, whoa, this is like way too scary. Like, we can't release this to the public. Like, what are you doing? But it's like, well, why did you hire a horror director to make this like PSA if you didn't want it to be scary?
Yeah, Night of the Living Dead, Season of the Witch, The Crazies.
Yeah.
And then they wanted him to make their little PSA. It's very funny to me, actually.
Yeah. So, yeah, for a long time, it was essentially shelved because of its disturbing content. But now it's being released in its 4K restoration. I should mention that I actually saw it at what was technically its premiere because one of the theaters where I work...
Right, that was 2 years ago, right?
Yeah, so I saw this in 2019 because the Regent Square Theater, which is no longer around where I worked, they had the official premiere of it, and I was lucky enough to be there so I could see it. And it was a very exciting thing just to actually be one of the first people to see this lost George A. Romero film, not only as a film fan, but as a Pittsburgher. It was just a very kind of exciting thing. There was a very palpable energy in seeing something that people thought would never be seen. And I like it a lot. I mean, it's one of those films that, even as I think about it more, it has grown on me, just in terms of being a pretty unflinching look at, like I said, the dangers of forgetting the elderly and just discarding them. And it just does it really well. I'm not going to get too into details because, like I said, it's been a couple years since I've seen it. But the main thing is that it all takes place, as the title suggests, in this one central amusement park. And it's led by an actor named Lincoln Mazel, I believe is his name.
I think that's how you pronounce that, yeah.
Yeah, who really carries this film with these really disheveled, terrored eyes, and his just general misdemeanor. It's kind of there's moments of dark comedy in it, and then he kind of carries it in a way that's almost sort of flippant at times, that I think allows you to kind of indulge film in essentially watching this poor old man just really just go through the ringer in a way that at first seems a little kind of repetitive and lacking a real central strong narrative. But once you really get to the core thesis of what Romero was doing here, I really think this is effective, and I can sort of see why they barred the film, but I don't think it's that scary. I think it was just scarier than what they anticipate it to be, which again, you hired George A. Romero to make it. I'm not quite sure what they had in mind for it as opposed to what he delivered, but I do recommend it a lot. It is on Shudder right now. I was hoping to rewatch the film before we recorded, but unfortunately I haven't had a chance to do so, but I do plan on it because I think, for one, it's only 54 minutes long. It's really short. You can get through it in basically an hour, and it's a really effective little PSA. It reminds you why you should care about the elderly. So that is the amusement park.
I want to see it. I mean, it's only 52 minutes long. It's on Shudder. It's a pretty easy to find movie at this point, and it's kind of magical to me that something like this could happen. That a movie, something like this that was made under some of the strangest circumstances actually is finding its time out there. And I have heard people are very much into the film. I know Chris Evangelista, who has been on the show before, really, really loved this and couldn't recommend it enough. And yeah, I hope people get something out of it. I might be able to check it out myself and let you know what I think. And I know that the budget for this is super low, $37,000 he spent on this. But considering that, that it is this kind of a relic of a movie that exists in the form that it exists in, I'm excited to sort of see what it is in actuality. Pretty excited about that.
Yeah, and the other thing too is that something I kind of lament about Romero's career is that because he was sort of saddled to making these zombie movies throughout his career, which I don't think he hated necessarily. I think he leaned into his fame. He made a lot of impactful films in that genre. But when you watch something like this and you realize that he can make something that's obviously a horror film, but claustrophobic and tense in a very different sort of way, but very singular to his style. You do have to sometimes wonder, like, what if we got more films from Romero that weren't exactly zombie films? Like, what could his career been if he was allowed to kind of do more stuff like this, that's still in the horror genre, but allowed himself to kind of stretch his legs and do some interesting and kind of disturbing things in different creative ways. So that's another aspect of the film that I also find very fascinating.
All right. Well, that's The Amusement Park. It's available on Shudder. So for me, I managed to catch Peter Rabbit 2, The Runaway, which is the sequel, obviously, to the 2018 film Peter Rabbit.
Very similar to The Amusement Park in terms of just watching its character just being horrifically mauled by these random people, right?
Well, I thought you were going to say that it was like such a delayed release. I mean, the marketing for this literally is like in theaters. Finally. It's like, calm down.
Yeah.
Like Amusement Park is like, okay, kid.
Yeah.
Whatever.
I don't know. I mean, granted, this movie is not for our target audience, but I don't feel like anyone I know was just like, damn it, when is Peter Rabbit 2 coming out? In the same way that,
just
like,
keep delaying it.
It's not like No Time to Die or like even like Tenet or something from last year where people are like,
sure,
when is that coming out? Like, I really want to see, is that ever going to come out? Even In the Heights, comparatively, like that was another film that, how
they're like writing down Peter Rabbit 2 on like a Post-it note of like, don't forget.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, no, I mean, maybe for family audiences, this was one that was awaited with bated breath and just kept getting delayed. But it is finally out. That is true.
It is finally out, and it's in a tough spot a little bit because it's the kind of movie where, a lot of families are going to come out and see it, but not a lot of kids are vaccinated. So I was curious how that was going to affect its box office, like, overall, but it's actually doing pretty well. It's, I think, doing so well, in fact, that I'm a little, like, confused a little bit. It's made more money than In the Heights worldwide, which is unbelievably interesting. So now I should mention it came out in Australia and the UK already, so that has a lot to do with it. But
yeah, I knew it was doing really well in like UK and Australia and stuff. I didn't think it was doing that well here comparatively.
Right. But yeah, it's made $56 million, and that's not bad. I mean, the first movie made a lot. It made like over 350. And I gotta be honest, like, I don't even remember. I know we had a conversation about it in 2018 when the first movie came out. I don't remember our conversation about it at all. And I remember thinking it was okay. Like, very forgettable. The things I remember were like, okay, the rivalry between Peter Rabbit, voiced by James Corden, and Rose Byrne is the lovable bee, and then Donald Gleason is, the cantankerous, like, McGregor guy or whatever, and they fight all the time. Like, that was the setup. It was simple, and it was nice enough.
I don't know. I remember it being like a weirdly very vicious film. That was the main thing that stuck with me.
I mean, the marketing really hyped that up.
Yeah, because like Beatrix Potter's book is like one of the like most gentle children's things ever. It's just, like these like very delicate drawings of like rabbits hanging out in the garden and things like that. And the movie was just like these rabbits trying to murder a man and like, like people dying and, like people yelling, fart jokes and stuff like that. It felt like
I don't remember people dying.
Well, didn't Sam O'Neill die in like the first like 10 minutes of film?
Did he voice the dad?
No, he was like the gardener character, like the classic gardener character, and they killed him off.
Oh, you're right. Yeah.
And like they poke his eye and stuff, and it's like, is he dead? That's the stuff I remember from the film.
Yeah, Mom.
Yeah.
I don't remember that at all. I remember Sam Neill being in the movie vaguely, but I don't remember Peter Rabbit murdering him. But what are you gonna do?
Oh, I should clarify. He didn't get murdered. He had a heart attack, but Domhnall Gleeson's character was like allergic to blueberries. And they kept like trying to like throw blueberries into his mouth. So I was talking about two different things. Sorry.
Okay. I mean, look, those rabbits, they're scamps, they're mischievous little rebels. Like, that's kind of like the big twist with this movie is by modernizing it, they keep the almost overall summer aesthetic of the storybook, but they have modernized it in a way to have a little bit more attitude. One thing I do appreciate about both of these movies, and I could be misremembering, it could have been more of a thing in the first one, but if so, I don't remember, but I like that they didn't have a ton of the really annoying, easy jokes about like twerking, for example, like all that really like quickly dated material. There's a little bit of it, I guess, but they're trying to be Paddington very much. these movies. They're not. They don't come even close. But they still have like a little bit of charm on their own. I'm not going to lie to you, Will. Peter Rabbit 2, The Runaway, it's okay. I kind of enjoyed it. And I think that it's filled with a lot of actually genuinely funny set pieces and jokes and moments. And this is a far more meta and self-aware movie compared to the first one, at least based on what I remember. The setup is that, you know, now B and Mr. McGregor, so the Donald Gleason character, the Rose Byrne character, they just got married. But of course, Peter's like, you're not my real father. Like, they're doing that whole thing. And they have published the book, Peter Rabbit, and it's becoming a bit famous. And Rose Byrne's character, B, she is kind of like trying to decide, like, oh, am I going to sell out? You know, am I going to start making these rabbits, like, you know, put them in space, you know, kind of like the Air Bud, kind of like space puppies, like that whole thing, because she's sort of being pressured by this publishing businessman played by David Oyelowo, who is kind of funny in this. And he's saying like, oh, you know, you'll sell a little bit with this Peter Rabbit book that, Will, you're kind of alluding to. You know, it's very pleasant and nice. But if you give them skateboards and put them on the beach, you know, you'll become like a best-selling author. So there's that whole aspect of the movie. There's this another aspect of the movie where Peter's feeling, you know, Peter's a kid and he's feeling like his parents or pseudo parents just sort of only see him as a bad seed, always getting up to trouble. He tries to do the right thing, but he still gets in trouble and he feels like nobody appreciates him. And so while they're in a more urban town, like not super urban, they don't take it too far. It's not like, I don't think they're in like London or anything. I think it's like Gloucester is what it's called. But they're in this new environment and Peter kind of runs off and he becomes friends with a couple of the bad kids. You know, this guy who's like, oh, I knew your father. And he kind of like falls in with some more like heist friendly rabbits who are like, you know, give in to your impish impulses, be a scamp. It's fine. And that's kind of like where this movie sort of goes. There's a farmer's market heist. There's betrayals. There's big budget, you know, chase scenes. And it's a lot. And the movie itself, it's making fun of itself a lot. And I think a lot of people are going to come out on one side of it. I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to make the fun movie for kids. You know, the movie with like the rabbits being cute. Flopsy and Mopsy are back, voiced by Elizabeth Debicki and Margot Robbie. And then we also have, you know, Cottontail, and we have, oh gosh, it's hard for me to remember all of the bunnies, who voices who. I think Cottontail is voiced by Daisy Ridley, or I think Daisy Ridley in the first film. I think it's somebody else though in this one, because it didn't sound like Daisy Ridley, but I'd have to look at that. But and then the narrator is also Margot Robbie. But yeah, like, it's fun watching these like rabbits get into trouble, you know, kind of going around town. They're friends. They do fun things together. But there's this whole vein of the movie where it's making fun of itself. And I think some people will come away from it being like, okay, that's for the adults to be like, ah, ha, ha, yeah, this movie is a sellout. That's funny. But it's sort of like, it's sort of like trying to make fun of itself and sort of get away with it, you know, to have its cake and eat it too, or have its carrot cake and eat it too, I guess. And by saying like, oh, we would never end a movie by doing this, this, and this. And then the joke is that they do this, this, and this because, you know, coinciding with the A plot, B is like, you know, I want to maintain the artistic integrity of my book. And then the movie just doesn't do that. I mean, they do all kinds of like winking jokes like that. And I was just confused by it. I was like, well, you can't just make a joke about it and leave it there. Like, we know that you know. Like, we know that you know what you're doing. Like, just making us know that you're doing it intentionally isn't anything. It's just sort of like you being like a smart aleck. And I don't know, the movie at times feels as mischievous as Peter Rabbit, and I think mileage will vary on that. I think critics will definitely look at that and scoff, whereas people who might be just a little bit more forgiving because it's a fun movie will just find that fun. You know, they're not going to have any heavy criticisms. And I think that what works about this movie is the most important thing. That's the fact that it's really entertaining. Will Gluck directs. Again, they make a joke at his expense at one point, which is funny. They make a joke about James Corden's voice being very annoying. You know, it's just all kinds of stuff like that. We're like, yeah, we know. like I don't understand personally why they think that it's like it's giving them any street cred to like be self-deprecating, because to me it doesn't aid the movie. I think you could cut a lot of that stuff out and just sort of lean in on how much you are sort of butchering this source material. It's okay. I think they're sort of trying to balance it between like, look, we are selling out, we know, like we're doing this film, we're doing all this merchandise, it's fine, but at least we're not like Alvin and the Chipmunks, the road chip, right? I think that's kind of what they're going for. They make a few jokes specifically that I think are invoking like Alvin and the Chipmunks, I guess, and Smurfs and things like that. So take that as it will. This is Sony Pictures, and I think so Columbia made it. It's distributed by Sony, and then Sony Pictures Animation did the rabbits, and the rabbits look really good. Like I think the animals and stuff look really nice, and like they don't overdo it so that it looks so realistic that it's kind of creepy. But I think that the fur and everything kind of like stands out. They kind of like blend nicely into this world, even though they're very cartoonish. And I'm glad this is as good as it is. Not great by any means, but I certainly think that it's got some value as a kind of goof off summer movie. That said, it's only in theaters, and if you're going to watch a movie in theaters, I don't think this is the one you should risk it all for. I mean, if you're vaccinated, that's one thing, but I think that's it's definitely not notable enough to justify seeing this over something that is really a knockout, like In the Heights, which we'll get to. But yeah, that's Peter Rabbit 2. Well, I'm not going to tell you you're missing much here. I think that you're okay.
Yeah, I didn't really have this one on my radar, and I wasn't terribly excited to see it. I honestly forgot it was coming out this weekend. I think it was supposed to come out, I think in like July or August initially, and then they moved it up to June, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong there, but I know the release date, as we suggested, has been in flux. So I don't know if that is hurting its U.S. domestic box office at all, but it doesn't sound like it's hurting it overall. But yeah, I do think this is the first Sony movie that's come out in theaters since the pandemic, if I'm not mistaken. I know there was like Mitchell's and the Machines and Wish Dragon we're going to discuss, but those are sold to Netflix. I believe it's the first one they've put in the theaters in like over a year. Is that true?
I'd have to double check, because I'd have to really think about what's actually come out, because I can barely think of movies they released in 2019, to be totally honest with you, because since like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, what have they really put out? I mean, I guess there was Jumanji was technically them, right? And I guess the Jumanji sequel, so that was 2019. So it's been a while. Oh, you know what? They did Bad Boys for Life, right? That was Columbia.
Yeah, that was just before the pandemic, right? That was in January 2020. I was looking it up now. Like, I know there was like some, I think like Sony Picture Classic movies that came out. For instance, like The Father and Here Today. But those are like smaller movies. I don't think those are like the Columbia titles, if I'm not mistaken.
But if you're talking about like wide release, I think that's a different story. Huh?
Yeah.
Because I mean, if you go back to 2019, yeah, sure, like Spider-Man Far From Home, it's coming back to me now. But 2020, I can't think of what they had slated for 2020 that got pushed and has already come out at this point.
I guess they were behind The Unholy, which I think did come out. We didn't discuss it. But they did push almost everything else back, it seems. So, yeah, this is one of their first big theatrical releases. Outside, I guess, of Monster Hunter, which kind of got a limited theatrical release, I think, last year into, like, drive-ins and stuff. So, yeah, first big major theatrical release. Peter Rabbit 2.
Yeah, and it was supposed to come out last February. The first movie came out in February, which I always thought was kind of weird. They're kind of like preempting Easter with it, and then now it's like a summer movie. Personally, I think that's fine. It does feel like a summer movie. You could release it, I think, anytime, really. If anything, I think the summer actually is probably smarter as a release strategy, because there's not a ton of movies in theaters with this kind of like programming. I think that they're aware of the fact, too, that like Luca, which, the new Pixar movie, for reasons that I am still like laying awake at night, is not in a movie theater. Like, I'm not going to rant about this, but the fact that Peter Rabbit frickin' 2 is in movie theaters and Luca, the new Pixar movie they spent 5 years on, is just being like shoveled over to Disney Plus. Like, it's infuriating. Like, oh my goodness. Like the fact that Sorry, like Peter Rabbit 2, like they didn't even have like a traditional screening for it for press. And so they literally like arranged for like critics to watch it like in a very weird way that I think is just, I don't know. It just makes me wonder like what in the world is going on with Disney where like, what are they doing? Like, I don't understand like why something like Raya and the Last Dragon, it's like $30 premiere access and it's in theaters and all this stuff. But then the big Pixar movie of the summer, nah, that's on Disney Plus. I mean, that's a whole tangent we'll probably get into more next week.
Yeah, I do believe it is at the El Capitan Theater next week, but that's the only one, at least in the U.S.
Right. They have to get those Oscar eligibility requirements. I don't know if they're, going to keep those requirements eased up from last year when they imposed the new rules. But yeah, that's Peter Rabbit 2, The Runaway. Not the most contentious movie. It's a 93-minute film. It's okay. I think the critics are all right with it as well. It's been hovering around like the upper 60s, low 70s on Rotten Tomatoes. So check it out if you dare. I think one of the taglines I saw was like "Hop, don't run" or something like that. Sure. All right, so I think it's time to get into our first big movie of the week. We're going to talk about In the Heights.
Once upon a time, in a faraway land called Washington Heights. Say it so it doesn't disappear.
Washington Heights!
Lights up on Washington Heights, up at the break of day. I wake up and I got this little punk I gotta chase away. Pop the grate at the crack of dawn, sing while I wipe down the awning.
Hey, good morning.
Ice cold piragua, cherry, strawberry, and just for today, I got my mate.
It's a story of a block that was disappearing.
The genius is back!
Yo, here's your chance, ask her out right now.
Hey!
There's something on your shirt.
Smooth operator, all damn.
We all had a sueñito. And when it came to dreams, we had to keep scraping by.
Maybe this neighborhood's changing forever. Maybe tonight is our last night together, however.
I just want to see the whole world through her eyes.
They're talking about kicking out all the dreamers. It's time to make some noise.
We had to assert our dignity in small ways. Little details that tell the world we are not invisible.
So In the Heights is a new musical adaptation based on the stage musical of the same name, which Lin-Manuel Miranda, of course, of Hamilton fame, did. This was like the first thing he did for Broadway. I mean, of course, it started off Broadway, but you know what I mean. He did this with Quiara Alegría Hudes, and this movie is also adapted from Hudes' screenplay. And Jon M is directing. He, of course, did Step Up to the Streets and Crazy Rich Asians and a few other things. And he's also like, he's done a bunch of TV, and, I think he did the Joy Luck Club back in the early 90s. So kind of an interesting choice of director. I think they really tapped him because I think Step Up with the Streets, I mean, that movie has such great choreography. And so if you're going to be bringing a musical like In the Heights to the big screen, you really, really need somebody who knows how to make an energetic and engaging dance movie. Now, this one, the original play, it starred Lin-Manuel Miranda himself, who, of course, like, this is like an autobiographical story for him. And it's more of an ensemble, of course, but like the central storyline involving his character, Uznavi, is now being played by Anthony Ramos. Anthony Ramos, you remember, he was Philip Hamilton in Hamilton. He's been in a bunch of things. We've seen him in like A Star is Born. We've seen him in TV projects like She's Gotta Have It. So he's been kind of coming up the last decade or so. And in the Heights, he was also in that. He played Sonny, the 14-year-old who is now being portrayed here by Gregory Diaz IV. And now Anthony Ramos is like front and center, kind of taking the torch, right, from Lin-Manuel Miranda, who plays the Barragua guy, who sells like the snow cones in this neighborhood, Washington Heights. And it's a story about gentrification. It's a story about, immigrants trying to like turn their sueñitos, their little dreams, into better lives for them and their community. It's a very interesting movie in the sense that there's no villain. There is just a lot of people who face circumstances and obstacles that people everywhere kind of face. But in this specific corner of the world, this magical place called Nuevo York. And I certainly was so hyped to see this movie. We kind of mentioned that it was delayed. It was supposed to come out last summer. They preemptively were like, no, we're going to wait because this movie needs to have its due. They didn't want the pandemic stink on it. And now that's happening. You can watch it in theaters now. And I've been listening to the soundtrack for this. I've seen parts of the musical, like the Broadway musical. I've never watched like the whole thing. So like some of my memories of it are pretty scattershot. I never had the chance to actually see the stage production. I'd love to see it someday. But the cast here also includes Corey Hawkins, you'll recognize from Straight Outta Compton. We also have Leslie Grace. This is like, I think, her first feature film performance. She's like a recording artist. Melissa Barrera, who is a Mexican actress, far better known for movies in Mexico. I don't think she's done a lot of American movies as far as I understand. Olga Merediz, who is probably going to be Oscar nominated. We'll see. And a few others like Jimmy Smits, who I was thrilled to see. I didn't see the trailer, so I didn't even know Jimmy Smits was in this movie. And when he popped up on screen, Jimmy Smits, you'll remember, of course, he's been in things like Baz Luhrmann's The Get Down, and he was probably his most famous roles, like Bail Organa from the Star Wars prequels, I guess.
Yeah, I didn't know if I wanted to peg that on him. But yeah, that's probably his most famous film role outside of this, I guess.
Film role, yeah. TV, he's like, ubiquitous. I mean, people remember him from like NYPD Blue and LA Law. I mean, and his career goes back way back. And then, West Wing, I think, is one of the more recent things people know him from, but love seeing him here. Now, this movie, they've been trying to make it since, I think, like 2008. Universal, even hired Kenny Ortega to direct it. And stuff fell through. The Weinsteins had it for a while. And then, Harvey Weinstein got brought down. This movie kind of felt a little bit cursed in a lot of ways because they really wanted to capitalize on Hamilton's success, right, in 2016 and really like put out in the heights and make this thing a big success. Eventually it was put over to Warner Brothers got their hands on it. And then the pandemic happened, and like they were so close. I mean, they had this movie almost completely done right before the pandemic really unleashed hell on movie theaters and society. And here it finally is. I mean, I feel so bad for this movie having to sit, like the people who made this having to sit on this movie for like a year, but it's now here and it's getting great reviews. I'll get this out of the way. I absolutely loved this film. It's a long film. It's definitely got some parts to it that I think are, kind of sloppy, but I couldn't care less. I thought this was a magical experience in the movie theater, and I just cannot wait to hear what you have to say about it, Will, because I have a feeling you like it even more than me, right?
I wish. No, but I do really like the movie. I will say I think I like the first half a little bit more than the second. I should mention I have seen the stage version of it, albeit a local production of it, but I have seen it on the stage. I'm pretty familiar with this material more so than other musicals when we review them. So I had some awareness of what this is going to be. But for the most part, I think it met or exceeded my expectations throughout. And I do agree with you that, like, I think one of the main keys is that it is such a big theatrical movie in every sense of the word theatrical. Like, it's big colors, just like it's big sound. I saw it in Dolby. I opted to see it that way because I was like, it's a musical. It's a big musical at that. So I wanted to see it in a kind of more pristine quality. And I definitely think that was for the better because some of these musical numbers, especially in Dolby, is just some of the like most magical kind of movie moments you can expect. For instance, the pool number, like hit midway through the film, fantastic. 96,000.
Yeah, probably my favorite entire set piece in the whole thing.
Yeah, and in Dolby, it's just like it shakes your seat. Literally, it's like they're like splashing and stuff. It's just it's a fantastic set piece. And that was just one of the times where it's like it really translates well into film because they can play with the space a little bit more while still having that theatrical choreography in a way that I think plays well. That's something about the film that I think really impresses me is that so many play productions that we've seen of late, especially from last year, they're honorable to the material, but they don't always fully transition to a cinematic quality, at least not to the full extent. We have seen some like The Father and stuff that are able to take the material in a different fashion and allow itself to be more cinematic. And I think this movie is able to kind of bridge that gap in a similar fashion where it's clearly playing up. There's obviously a lot of reverence to like West Side Story in both the stage production and the film version. And I think for the better, especially in the opening of the film. it's very clear that they're reminiscent of that, and I think they play it up in that respect very well. For me, I guess where my issues kind of come in is that the second half is where they start to change material, and I don't think all the changes that they make are bad, but there are definitely a lot of changes. Like some song numbers are moved around, like the way it's plot is a little bit different. They make a couple creative changes that I think some of them work. Some of them are a little weird. Like, for instance, like they'll change a song number without getting into like specifics that like was later in the show as opposed to earlier, but they don't really like change the song. So like the lyrics don't always add up to like what's being said. Now, granted, I think the actors are able to sell the emotion of the moment, so it still works. But there's like kind of this weird dissonance at times where it's just kind of like, all right, well, like you changed this, but you didn't change that. That's kind of weird. And then they add some things that I'm kind of like mixed on. For instance, the framing device of the story, I kind of take or leave. I don't know how you felt about that per se. I didn't hate it, but I also kind of felt like it weighed the movie down at times. To like kind of like stop the film to have like these sort of like monologue segments that I don't know. I didn't think they really added as much to the story. And likewise, like I know we kind of disagreed about this, the extra inclusion of Lin-Manuel Miranda as far as his character in the film. I get why they have him in the film, but I also kind of feel like every time he's in the film, the movie has to stop to be like, hey, here's Lin-Manuel Miranda. There's the guy. Check him out. There he is.
Ridiculous. He's not in it that much.
But like,
oh my gosh,
it stood out to me because I think everyone kind of acknowledges that like very talented writer, very talented musician. As an actor, I think he's often passable, but his style of acting seems different than everyone else here, where it's a little bit like, I don't want to say like mugging, but it's a little bit more broader than everyone else. So it always just kind of stood out to me whenever he was in a scene. But it sounds like we're going to disagree on that.
Yeah, I think he's fine in it. I think he's really good in this movie, and he's not in it a lot. And when he shows up, it's his story. Like it's him sort of like passing it down. And I don't know. You're making, to me, it's like you're making it sound like he like exploded like a tertiary role into something bigger. And that's definitely not the case. I mean, it's just such a small little part, and I think it's totally fitting.
Yeah, I mean, like I told you, at the beginning when it's just like him walking by and they do like a literal like passing of the torch, I thought that was sweet and like nice. It was just like, okay, like here's him kind of being like, hey, here you go, kid, like do it well. And then later they're like, oh, here's a musical number with Lin-Manuel Miranda. I was like, oh, okay,
yeah, and it's good.
Whatever,
it's a really good number.
Because I guess like we'll disagree on that.
I think it's really good because first of all, you get to have Christopher Jackson in there from Hamilton, and you're just sort of selling like how freaking hot it is. It adds to the story in terms of like, showing a little bit more on the ground level how businesses are struggling, but through a song that doesn't sound depressing. It's like sort of like making the best of a situation. I think it actually, it's nice. It's a nice little break from like the main storylines, a fun little aside.
Yeah, I mean, I get as far as like expanding on the neighborhood, I don't mind in that respect, but I don't know. I guess we'll just have to agree or disagree as far as whether it benefited or hurt the film. I just felt it was a bit much. But like you said, it's his musical, it's his movie. He's been trying to do it for 12 years, whatever. It's his time to shine. Maybe it was Warner Brothers being like, you have to put Lin-Manuel Miranda in the film because he is the star here. Because, for the most part, with the exception of like a few names, it's not like it's like A-list here. But, I think it's fine. It's not like a huge issue. It's not my biggest complaint. It just was one of those things where it's like, every time he's in, it's just like, okay, here's the Lin-Manuel Miranda scene, all right, and then we'll get back to the plot.
Yeah, I really think that they really nailed making this feel really cinematic, feel like its own thing. I don't have a problem with movies that feel like a play because they're based on one. Like, there's absolutely a place for that, something like Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. But this one in particular, I think that it like sort of said, it is taking a lot from West Side Story. It's even borrowing a lot from like Do the Right Thing, the Spike Lee movie. And
yeah, it's
just sort of, it's capturing a very specific mood, a specific time period. The thing that I find probably the most interesting about the setup is that, this is a story, like a play that was really 2008, like totally different era. And now they kind of had to modernize it, and they made those changes, like you said, because it's 2020, 2021, like it's just a different time. So they have to add in these other things that feel a little bit more authentic to, the Latinx community right now, especially in New York City. So I have a few criticisms too, but I mean, I don't want to, I feel like we're just like throwing a lot of criticisms, and I hope we're not underselling, I think, how good this is. Like this to me is like an absolute spectacle of a movie. Like, and you've touched on that a bit, but yeah, I just want to make sure that that's being said. It's got some problems, but this thing really is like where it's supposed to be amazing in terms of the choreography, in terms of like how these dance numbers and song numbers have been realized, are just like, they're jaw dropping. Like, I can't believe some of the stuff they pulled off here. Now I have problems. I think that like they try some of these things with special effects that are really hit or miss. I think that Vanessa's storyline, Vanessa played by Melissa Barrera, I think her storyline and a lot of her back and forth with Usnavi in here just does not quite work for me. Like, I think when we have Nina played by Leslie Grace and we have Benny played by Corey Hawkins, there was like real chemistry there. There was like, I felt like their story was moving along organically. It made sense to me. The whole thing with Usnavi and Vanessa, I was very much like, I didn't quite buy it. I thought that Usnavi had so much more charm with all the other characters, to be totally honest, and I was so much more invested with his relationship with Abuela Clario, played by Olga, his relationship with even with like Benny, of course, but especially Sonny, his his teenage cousin, who I think is one of the real hearts of the film, along with Abuela. But I don't know, I think like the romance of this movie, it just isn't quite as effective, to be totally honest. But again, it's fine because it's not West Side Story. It's not supposed to be this epic romance. It's really just supposed to be about like this neighborhood. You mentioned the framing device, and I'll say that like, yeah, I was mixed on it too. I think that the framing of it is difficult for me to accept because it just creates a problem that wasn't there before in terms of like setting your expectations for what's going to happen in the end instead of like keeping you guessing. At the same time, I do think that they were nice. Like, it was kind of nice to sort of take a break from the narrative because it's so loud. There's so much happening. I liked these small moments, like the Paragua guy. I liked when they sort of like slowed things down, quieted things down, and brought it back to like these kids hearing the story. And it sort of created like a reason for this world to be a little bit of a fantasy world because he's telling this story. And that stuff definitely clicked with me more. I do agree with you. Like, the second half was losing me. I was kind of like, it's a bit all over the place. I think that they really lose track with where the story is going. Like, time starts to lose meaning. But at that point in the movie, I mean, we're almost like 2 hours into the movie at that point. So I'm already sold on this. I'm already loving it. I have so much goodwill like stocked with this movie that I personally was able to let it pass, because I think particularly they have a number, the Carnival de Barrio is so freaking good. It's so like lovely and engaging, and I just wish that the second half had that energy level all the way throughout. But yeah, it goes into some directions I think that are a little bit like, okay, I think we can just end this now. We don't have to keep doing these ballads. We already had like 4.
Yeah, but no, I agree with you. I think the Abella scene, I think that's what you're referring to, like around the 3/4 mark, is probably the highlight of the film. Just like the most visually inspired, just the performance of it alone is fantastic.
The story of it, I mean, my goodness.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where it's like you could watch that on its own. It's like almost like a little short story, and you can be taken by it outside the context as well. It's just a fantastic sequence, probably my favorite, and like you said, could lead to some more tension, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I mean, there is something I find kind of charming about how, as you're suggesting, time kind of fades or erodes, because that is almost like sort of cinematic in its own way. And there is like this mix of like grounded and fantastical that I'm actually kind of impressed the movie is able to balance that, considering that like kind of almost on a scene by scene basis, it kind of flips between the two. But I never really found that to be off-putting or distracting, because I felt it kind of adds to the mysticism of the story, especially with the framing device, where like it's clear that he's kind of embellishing certain details as opposed to others. Though I guess my issue with the framing device is that like he'll often be talking about these side characters, and it's just like, well, how would he even know this? like these like kind of like more private, intimate details. It's just like
I guess it,
it's a How I Met Your Mother thing where it's just kind of like you have to kind of forgive it, I guess.
I guess so. Yeah, that didn't really bother me, because I was like, this community is so tight knit, and like they kind of make a point of how like everybody knows everything that's going on. I wanted to mention, probably the storyline that clicked with me the most was Nina's. I really just and so just to get this out there. I mean, I'm Puerto Rican, and so like she's one of the Puerto Rican characters, and there's this whole thing about an East Coast Puerto Rican moving to the Bay Area, and trying to break out of that neighborhood. I have my own community back east. And I mean, they just really nail, I think, some really subtle things about being like, a Caribbean Latino or Latina in California. Like there is something like really just difficult to explain about that experience, but this movie does it like really efficiently. And just the culture shock she feels, where she's like torn between, the people, and like she goes to Stanford, right? And so like there's the people there who are certainly, they look at her a certain way, but she's not really accepted by, the Latinx community out there that is mostly Mexican and Mexican American, right? And so like she's just sort of feeling like out of place. And it's things like that I think were so interesting. I came across a few critics who were like, oh, I don't believe, like there's so many Hispanic people who go to Stanford. Why would she feel like she doesn't belong? And I think like, you don't understand. Like you don't really get that, like we're not a monolith, And, if people figure out you're Puerto Rican, all of these different like expectations, all these like assumptions, I should say, are made about you. And I just love that this movie has the time and energy to get to that. I think that some of the things they take out though, like I'm disappointed a bit, with how they sort of like underplay Corey Hawkins' character Benny, and just like the difficulty and the racial tensions between him and Nina's father, played by Jimmy Smits. I think some of that was kind of left under the table. His career is kind of in flux, and I think the movie's missing a couple of scenes, like really defining the dynamic between those three characters in general. It's such an important part, I think, of the story, and I don't think it gets its full due. And I also think that, with the exception, I think of Benny, I mean, they really leave out the Afro Latinx community in this. I mean, there's obviously a lot of people in color in this. There's a lot of, more like fair complexion people in these communities, but the movie kind of like, I don't know, creates this like one complexion for a lot of like Dominican folks, Mexican folks, and Puerto Rican folks. And it's definitely very different from that. And that kind of took me out a little bit. I was like, why couldn't you have cast, more darker skinned people? Like that is what Washington Heights looks like. It felt like that was one thing. Like I credit the movie and applaud the movie a lot for choosing to put in people who are not the biggest names, for not putting in people just to sell this movie. They took a chance. I mean, they put in people who were not as well known, but who could do it, who could sing really well and play these parts really well. So to me, it seems very odd that they wouldn't go all the way with it, with being that more representative. So to me, that is like the one thing about this movie that really gives me pause. I still enjoyed the heck out of it, and I still think that it's absolutely wonderful, and it's got so much life and energy. But yeah, I think that it definitely makes a massive misstep there that I think is going to alienate a lot of folks who would otherwise love this.
Yeah, and then there's I don't know if you've seen with The Root, they have a interview with Jon M where they actually address that, and it's pretty awkward. If you're curious to check that out, it's not an easy watch, but they do they try to address that in a rather clunky fashion.
I did hear too, Melissa Barrera like commented on it and said some things that are extremely regrettable, and it's weird. It's an unforced error in my view. Like it's such an easy thing to do, and I don't understand why, in 2020 when this was supposed to come out, I was going to say in 2021, we can't get past, I think, this like bias against, just the fact that, the Latinx people, like there are Asian Latinx people, there are Black Latinx people. I mean, it's just, that's what these communities look like. So all I'm saying is, like we could do better. It certainly doesn't ruin the movie for me. I think like most people aren't even going to notice, right? But I think the people who will notice are the ones who this movie would mean so much more to. So I just feel like it's such a missed opportunity.
Yeah. But to your earlier point, I did want to mention that even though I was a little disappointed that the character of Kevin Rosario was a little bit underplayed throughout the film, I do, as we mentioned, I really do like Jimmy Smits' performance in this, and I really did like his dynamic with Leslie Grace's character, Nina. And I thought, even though I wasn't as crazy about the dramatic scenes as opposed to the musical scenes. I kind of felt like the dramatic scenes could be kind of hit and miss compared to musical moments. I always thought their scenes were some of the highlights of the film. Especially there's like a dinner sequence that in, I guess, a lesser film could have been melodramatic or explosive in a way that that felt inauthentic, but I found it to be completely engaging, and I can understand both characters' perspectives, but they're both, you can see the flaws as well, and it just was like good cinematic drama, and I was like, yes, I want the movie to be like on this level throughout, and I was kind of annoyed that it wasn't. Yeah. But still, I think their performances are fantastic, and I did really like their scenes together. Like I said, if anything, I just kind of wish they allowed the character of Kevin Rosario to have a little bit more time, because they took out one of his musical numbers, which would have been like a Jimmy Sits solo, and it's like, oh man, that would have been fun, but oh well.
Yeah, they took out a lot of stuff with his character, which is kind of sad.
Yeah. The only thing narratively outside of what we mentioned that I guess didn't quite work for me was I really did enjoy the Gregory Diaz's The Force performance as Sonny, but I felt how they handled the character in the second half was kind of clunky. I don't know how you felt about that, but
I liked it. I think that it almost felt clunky, but I think they brought it home. Like they gave it a purpose by the very end that I appreciated.
Yeah, I just kind of wish they had incorporated more of his character earlier in the film to, I guess, have those moments kind of sing later in the film. No pun with the musical. But I think it's not terrible or anything. It doesn't like take the film down. I just kind of wish that they had incorporated into the film maybe a little bit more organically. It kind of just felt like they weren't 100% sure how to incorporate that story into the narrative, and it just kind of came abruptly midway through.
I don't know. I mean, they did bring it up in the first half. I mean, there's a whole scene with Mark Anthony, his father, in the movie, and they do set it up. Yeah. I mean, he only gets one scene,
right?
But they bring it up. I get what you're saying. I think they did kind of like the bare minimum to sort of
that's what I mean.
Add it in.
Yeah.
I think this movie does have like some pacing hiccups in terms of like there are just times in the movie where like we're far away from Anthony Ramos. Like he doesn't show up for like a big chunk of it, and it's difficult for them to sort of like weave all these storylines together. It's a bit awkward in that sense, but. It's just to me, it barely even registers because like it's such an engaging film that I'm so able to forgive all this stuff.
Sure. And the only thing I might push back on is that I do agree with you that Anthony Ramos and Melissa Barrera, or how do you pronounce her last name? Barrera?
Barrera, yeah.
Barrera. I don't think they have the best chemistry in the world, but I thought Melissa Barrera's performance, her vocal performance at the very least, was fantastic. Like I think she did some of the best like musical moments.
Yeah.
I thought she was really good.
It's just the writing. It's not the performance. It's just I think the way these characters are written and like their whole sort of like will they won't they thing. I don't. There's something about it that just didn't have any energy to it. Like I didn't buy a lot of it.
It's a little perfunctory, I guess.
Yeah, I mean it's weird because like they're both so good, like and especially like when they're with other characters, but like when it's them, I just felt like. You don't really like each other. I mean, he has like a little bit of a puppy dog crush on her, I guess, but like I don't know. I just didn't buy this whole like Wish Dragon had a more like engaging romance, if you ask me. I mean, we'll get to that, sure.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
That's a debate for another movie. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I will say though about Anthony Ramos's performance is that when I saw the stage production, one thing that stood out to me. And I don't know the actor's name, and I'm not trying to like put him down, but I do remember when I saw the stage production that it did feel like the lead actor was kind of trying to do a Lin-Manuel Miranda like impersonation at times, just because the role was so catered to him initially. And I was really worried when I saw the film. Was like, is Anthony Ramos just going to try to do like his impression of Lin-Manuel Miranda? And I think for the most part,
does his own thing.
I think, for the most part he does. Like, there's a couple times where it feels like he's mimicking him, but not in a way that's felt overly distracting or anything like that. And generally, I thought he did a good job. So
I didn't catch any of that. I thought Anthony Ramos, he's like this movie's like, he's just the shining star here, And there's just so many moments in this, and I've already like rewatched like part of the movie. Like I can't get enough of it, honestly. Where I'm watching Anthony on screen, and he's just like. he's just so electric. He's got so much star power. Like, I don't know. There's something about his presence and his charisma as an actor where he's this underdog character and you're rooting for him, but you're also like really hoping that he has an experience that kind of like pushes him towards self-actualization. Like, he's a good person, but I don't know, they don't need to have all of this contrived conflict. They don't need a villain. They just don't need these things to sort of like spur his character. Instead, it's a guy who like lives with his community, and I don't know, he feels like such an individual, but also part of this greater whole, and in a way that I think that he absolutely sells. So I think that it's a terrific performance. I wanted to say, like, we talked a lot about the things we like in terms of how this movie is like, it's big, it's audacious, it swings so hard, and it takes a lot of risks for sure. And I think that's where it kind of is getting into a little bit of trouble with some people who are analyzing it. But I think where this movie shines even more so probably is the small details. You know, there's this wonderful line from Abuela Claudia about, you know, the dignity in the small details, and about, you know, showing the world that you're not invisible, but doing it in a, you know, a subtle way too. And there's just so many little moments like that just connected with me. Like, and some of it's kind of dumb stuff, you know, like not dumb, but, you know, just kind of like seemingly trivial, I'll say that, right? Where just people carrying Tide sticks in their purse, you know, like little moments in like the salon where it's like just like little expressions and little ways of talking and little things that they added to the movie, like extras who are, you know, they don't look like Hollywood, you know, extras. They look like average everyday people. Like I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, they were just people that lived in this area or lived in an area like it, and they brought them in, and they look like average, you know, like finding the beauty in like the everyday, I think, is a big theme of this movie, and they put that throughout the movie, and it works so well, and it's such a great emotional addition to the movie. So I'm such a huge fan of this. I think that it's really wonderful, and yeah, I'm really happy to hear that you have no issues with it whatsoever, that you love it.
Sure.
More than anyone I know, it seems like.
Oh,
so, you know.
Yeah, just nothing but raves from me. Yeah.
I'm just in denial. It's fine. Yeah, but yeah, I'm a really, really high B+. I mean, I can't give it the A- just because I think that I think that, yeah, it's handful of missteps I think really have to be accounted for here, and just I think that it lets down a very sizable portion of, I think, the people who are coming to see this and deserve something a little bit better in terms of the representation. But it does nail a lot of other aspects of representation, so I still want to give it a lot of praise there. And it, as a musical, as a Broadway musical to film, it is a stunner. It really is. And so I'm really glad that it resonates as well as it does. So very high B+, verging on an A- for me. What about you?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm a B+ as well. Mainly because I think at its best, musicals are some of the purest forms of cinema. They have that otherworldly quality. They're just so big and earnest by design. And I think this movie is no exception. There's something very refreshing about seeing a musical this big, like a legitimate blockbuster musical in theaters again. Not only just being in theaters again, but seeing like a movie like this in theaters again. It's been so long since there's been like a musical like this from Hollywood, and it just feels very comforting. It is, I think, at its best, like some of the most impactful musical moments that you can get in a theater in quite some time. And I think when it does hit, it really does hit. You know, naturally by design, because it's a musical. You know, Jon M and Lin-Manuel Miranda are they're prone to have rather corny moments in both their works, and I don't think that's an exception here. But I think because they have such an earnest heart as far as material, and the cast here is so good that they're able to make this something that really does sing throughout. Like we said, I think there are a couple missteps or hiccups or just things that came a little clunky, just don't fully transition from stage to screen, or changes that they made that I just don't think fully work. But I think those are ultimately fairly minor compared to the things that do work, even though we have been ultimately focusing more on some of the negatives. I think just because when you do break it down, those faults are a little bit easier to notice. But I think when you're watching the movie, it just really does work throughout. Like I said, I think more so in the first half than the second, but just throughout the film, there are so many wonderful little moments, including there's like a club sequence too that I thought was really fantastic. that I don't think we mentioned yet. That I found that scene to be just a lot of fun as well. Yeah, it was just a good time at the movies, and I definitely would recommend people seek it out in theaters if they feel comfortable and willing to do so, as opposed to HBO Max, just because I haven't seen it on HBO Max, but I imagine it doesn't have the same power as seeing it in theaters, so that is my recommendation.
It doesn't. I think this is a big screen adventure worth having. And we didn't talk enough about the music, which, it's Lin-Manuel Miranda, right? You're getting sort of that like hip hop stuff. But real quick, I'll say, I really like that they incorporated a lot of salsa, merengue, samba, not just in the dancing, of course, but like the music really pops here. And it does have like a really significant, a distinct identity to this neighborhood. So all that stuff is really great as well. And I'm a big fan. All right, so that is In the Heights. It is available to watch right now in theaters and on HBO Max, being released by Warner Brothers, and it is 143 minutes long. It's not doing super great box office. It's only made, as we're recording this, a little over $11 million. It's a $55 million budget, and it's performing well below expectations, which to me is just sad. Like I hope that word of mouth catches with this. I hope that people continue to watch it and have the time and energy to go see it. I know it's difficult because I think that a lot of people of color in particular who would want to go see this are not going to movies right now for lots of different reasons. And I hope that changes soon because it's great in the theater.
Yeah. I will say, it's hard to compare it because of so many circumstances, but if we look at this as something like The Greatest Showman, which I think opened at a similar number, that movie had such long legs that became such a huge hit, like after the fact. That might also, happen here, maybe, I don't know, but that is one potential positive that could happen later on, but we'll have to see later on.
I was thinking about that too, but I think we have to remember that was a December film. And I think that musicals don't come out usually in the summer for this reason. It just feels like the people who want to go see musicals are typically not going to movies in the summer months. And I think that they were taking a big risk here to try to like change that. But I don't think it ultimately, I don't think for now it's paying off because I'm worried that there's too many movies coming out, in the summer for this thing to have legs. But we'll see. It is an asterisk of a summer movie season. So who knows what the future will hold for In the Heights. All right, let's move into our next film of the week. So this one, it wasn't really on my radar until super recently. I do remember it came out in China already a while back, I think back in January. And it is a new Sony Pictures animation film, their second animated film of the year after Mitchell's vs. the Machines, their second one on Netflix this year. And that is Wish Dragon. Wish Dragon is computer animated. It's kind of like a fantasy comedy, Chinese aesthetic remake of Aladdin, essentially. It was written and directed by Chris Appelhans, and Columbia is putting this one out. And I don't know too much about Chris Appelhans' career. I know that he's like kind of like an illustrator. He's done a lot of production design. And he's done some kids books like I think Sparky and a Greyhound, a Groundhog, and a few. He's an interesting guy. Not exactly someone who tends to be on our radar in the film world, but so this movie, like I mentioned before, it is really like the Aladdin setup, where it's kind of like there's a genie, but it's a wish dragon, and instead of a lamp, it's a teapot. And we have our main character, Din, voiced by Jimmy Wong. And he lives in, I don't think they ever say like where they live exactly. I assume it's maybe like Beijing, Hong Kong. It's somewhere in China. And it's like a big city. And Din, he's working class. He doesn't have a lot of money. He grew up very poor, but he has aspirations because his childhood best friend, who he misses dearly, Lena, voiced by Natasha Leobardizo, she has become sort of like the Mary Jane Watson of this world, like Jasmine, she's very rich and she's like a model. She's on this big billboard that he sees every day, like in Spider-Man 2. And he wants to reconnect with her. And this movie is kind of weird in the sense that like, okay, use social media. But I guess that just can't happen for reasons the movie doesn't get into, because this does take place, I should say, in the modern day. And eventually, though, Din comes across this wish dragon voiced by John Cho. The wish dragon's name is Long, and he gets 3 wishes. Like, as you know, as that tends to happen. I mean, it's again, it really is following the Aladdin thing, where he's trying to decide, like, what are my wishes going to be? How could I use my wishes to reconnect with this person? And I did mention, before that I think that the sort of like romance between these two characters is more engaging than Anthony Ramos and Melissa Barrera and In the Heights. And Will, I think you scoffed a little bit at that notion, and so this is your chance. I think this movie is cute. I think that their little romance is charming, and I thought this was very fun. And whatever. Yeah,
I mean, it's definitely cute. I don't think anyone can really dispute that. I think it goes out of its way to be as cute as possible, including. Actually, I don't know if I'll mention that what I was going to say because it's kind of a spoiler. But
I thought you were going to say the dragon is pink. That is a big spoiler.
Well, yes, no, that is true. The dragon is pink. But
love pink dragons.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, even more so than the romance in the Heights, I just felt like the formula here was always so apparent that I don't know if I ever fully allowed myself to be engaged with the romance because I felt like the movie was so structured for me to follow that romance in a certain way that I never really felt it was as organic. It just kind of felt like they had to do this for this reason. And that's not to say they don't take steps to, have a little bit more humanity established. There's like a nice little like montage sequence earlier on in the film where they establish their relationship and stuff. So it's not like incompetent by any stretch of the imagination. I just didn't really find it to be as engaging as you did, I guess.
I don't know. I was kind of telling you, I saw like half of this movie and then I had to stop. And then I was complaining about it to you at one point. And my complaint was that there's this whole thread of the movie about like, it's not about the money, it's don't worry about the price tag. It's that song, the whole song the whole movie is about like, yes, this dragon really just wants him to get his 3 wishes over with. Right. And he's just like, just wish for money. Money will solve your problems. And like, yeah, I'm thinking to myself, yeah, it would. Like, it would solve all of his issues. He'd be able to do all the things that he's trying to do. He'd be able to lift his family out of poverty. I think this movie has a very strange, like, anti-money narrative that I do think that was kind of interesting. I mean, it is kind of against formula in a way because there's this whole thing where he really believes that he can, win the affections of Lena. Like, she won't care if he's rich or poor, or she won't care if he's rich or poor. Like, he keeps saying that. But then at the same time, he's also temporarily trying to make himself seem rich. Like, he literally does the I wish I was a prince thing. And if that's the case, like, it just doesn't make sense. And I think like the movie even says to his face, like, the dragon is constantly like, you're dumb, you're an idiot. Like, this is the most inefficient way to get what you want in this scenario. And I think it's because the movie has this like weird, like, he has to be pure of heart. He has to learn a lesson about, like, I do think the movie actually does make a choice here to sort of upend his expectation. And actually it kind of proves, or kind of like defies his point of like, she won't care if he's rich or poor at one point, which I actually thought was kind of an interesting little wrinkle. I don't want to get too much into detail, but yeah, that was actually like a pleasant surprise. I think this movie does go in a couple of interesting directions there.
I didn't really find that interesting because I found that to be expected as well. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you in that I think the second half is a little bit more interesting than the first. This is the inverse of In the Heights in that respect, and that I think at the beginning of the film I was kind of like whatever about it, like, like we were saying, it's like Aladdin Redux, almost to a fault, or I guess not even to almost to a fault, because it just doesn't really seem like its own narrative. It just kind of feels like we're just doing the Aladdin thing over again. But as the movie, I guess, allows itself to be a little bit more individualistic and have a little bit more creative leeway, I think it is better, but I still don't really think it ever stands out enough for me to like fully get with it. But that's not to say that there isn't stuff in here that I liked or appreciated. Yeah,
I was caught up in it, to be totally honest. I think the things that I like that they did do a little bit differently here, I think that Long is extremely different from the genie. from Aladdin. Like they're totally different characters. They did a good job of like making him feel like just his own thing. I mean, they do this whole thing where he used to be human, and there's this whole backstory that like informs Din's story. I don't think that their friendship is super organic. Like it just kind of, I don't know. I do like in the beginning where they're more antagonistic, and then they're kind of like trying to one up each other. And there's a lot of fun there compared to Aladdin does something very different that works for that movie, right? I think though where this movie I think loses me is I just don't love the animation. I think I like the setting. I like the idea of modern day Aladdin. I think that there is fun stuff you can do there where like the dragon doesn't understand modern day society. It makes sense because he's been in a teapot for 1,000 years and they have fun with that. There's a couple funny moments there, but wow, I think that the animation here, I mean, no disrespect because I'm sure they worked extremely hard on it. It just looks so smooth. Like, and I don't mean smooth in a good way. There's just no texture to this world. And its idea of physics is way too cartoonish.
See, that's what I liked.
Really?
Yeah, no, actually, I really liked how playful and cartoonish this was. It had kind of a zippy energy to it. I actually found that to be a little bit more appealing because we've seen so many movies, animated movies now, that feel like they're trying to strive for some like grounded realism. Not to the fullest extent, but you do kind of see more films that, because CG technology allows for something that can replicate reality a little bit easier, it does make me long for the sort of like zippiness of like something from the 2D era. And I get that, like, I think this movie had a smaller production than your typical Sony animated film, so I feel like that it did hinder the film in that respect. Like, it does seem like the animation here is a little bit cheaper than your average animated film in that respect, but I did really appreciate the style being as like kind of outlandishly cartoonish as possible, considering like there is like this like metaphysical dragon stuff that could play with that. That was actually something that I did find kind of endearing and fun about the film.
Yeah, I really wish that this had the budget of something like Over the Moon, because I think that movie was a little bit more. It's just, I don't mind cartoonish movies. I don't mind if things are a little bit Looney Tunes. It's just that combined with these environments looking so fake. I mean, to me, like there are CG, like computer animated cartoons on television that look sharper and crisper and more vivid than this. And that to me is a big issue because, like, I don't know. I also think that one thing that I do like that they added here is some of the fun kung fu moments. There's a lot of fun like fighting. I think the way that the characters fight is really playful, and that stuff I think was like, if you're gonna make things a bit of like unrealistic, that is where it really works because like those moments are super engaging and fun, and there's like a parade fight, and like I don't know, those set pieces are really engaging. I was thinking of Jackie Chan Adventures while watching this. There's a lot of energy there. So I was about to say, then I saw Jackie Chan helped produce this along with one of the producers of Shrek, and I was like, wow, clearly he lended like coming out of like I think the creative collaboration of this movie. I think that they had some really good ideas to make it engaging, to make Din's character really interesting, to give him a sense of agency. I just wish they had made him a little bit smarter, or like I don't know. I just wish we had a character here who made decisions and choices that are easy and relatable, like easy to relate to, like easy to understand. But instead, like I think that he just has this weird decision making issue in the movie that I really struggled with personally.
Yeah, I mean, I did in the moment at times did kind of find myself thinking of Jackie Chan Adventure because of the family aspect. Like kind of like the like overbearing elders who like are constantly kind of like butting in and like trying to like comment on everything. I think that's like kind of amusing concept that they don't really play up too much, unfortunately, because I found those scenes to be a little bit more fun and engaging than the central narrative. And likewise, like as you mentioned, there's like the parade sequence that's kind of like silly and goofy, and there's also like some sort of like expected fish out of water stuff with the dragon that at first I thought was going to be grating, but I actually found that sequence to be one of the more entertaining moments of the film because there's like this scene involving traffic that there's a sight gag in that scene that involving like a side character that is like one of the few like genuine big laughs I got out of the film. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but there's like this guy who
probably
he like gets manipulated by the dragon, and just his expressions throughout that scene are so funny to me.
I also appreciated the guy who like turns his airbag into a pillow.
Yeah, like that stuff. I was like all about that stuff. Like if the movie was on that energy throughout, I kind of wish it was, because I felt like that was where I was with the film. I was like, you know what, maybe I do like this thing. Like, and then it would go back to Censor narrative, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah. Now we're back to this thing. But yeah, I mean, I think it shows signs of promise. I don't think it's like a terrible film or anything. I just think I preferred personally when it was willing to be a little bit goofier and sillier, because that's the stuff like from Aladdin that I do really like, that is able to be like kind of larger than life, because it has like at its core, you know, this larger than life comedian who was just animated by design. They could play that up, and I wish the movie was following Aladdin's influence in that respect, as opposed to the narrative, which I could kind of take or leave ultimately.
Yeah, the narrative is not very strong, but I'm glad that they at least tried a few creative things with it. They did a few things toward the end there that at least kept me engaged. They kept me from checking out completely, but it was difficult to buy Din as a character in certain parts. At the same time, you know, I mentioned before, I really think that the central like relationship between the friends and like the whole opening montage, I mean, a lot of that stuff it's just cute. It's really cute. I really like the relationship between Din and his mother, voiced by Constance Wu. She voices that role super well. She's such a fun character, and I think this whole movie is filled with fun characters. You mentioned like the side characters. There's a villain here named Pockets, voiced by Aaron Yu, who I loved. Such a fun villain who had this whole thing where he only fights with his legs, and he's like Sanji from One Piece, basically. Very menacing, very dastardly. I liked him.
I mean, not only that, I also found it amusing that like he didn't ever use his hands. Like when he points, he uses his legs and stuff. That was kind of a neat creative design choice, I felt. Like stuff like that. Yeah, like and that's also like, again, like when the movie is willing it to be as like kind of goofy and over the top as possible. Those are moments that I found it to be like kind of fun and endearing. It just when it tries to be like other animated films in the Latin fashion, I found it to be kind of tired and formulaic.
I'm kind of surprised too that I know Jackie Chan voiced Long in the Chinese dub, the Mandarin dub of the film. I'm kind of surprised they didn't have him voice the American one. I'm really glad they got John Cho. I think he does a great job, but I thought that was kind of interesting too when I saw that.
Yeah, I thought John Cho was fine. It sounded like he was doing like a Justin Theroux impression at times, which I found kind of weird. I don't know.
I didn't think of Justin Theroux. I thought of like, I don't know. I was kind of thinking of like Paul F. Tompkins a little bit. I don't know. Just like this very stagey, like, very over the top. It's definitely not the typical thing you would expect from John Cho, but I guess it worked for me.
Yeah, because when the character came in, I was just like, oh yeah, legendary impressionist John Cho is here. But I do appreciate, like you said, like it's not him like doing a Robin Williams impression. He's doing a different sort of character. Nothing like terribly original, but at the same time, it's not like he's just doing the genie again. It didn't have the same issues like with Will Smith in the live action Aladdin movie, where he had to like kind of like split the difference. He is allowed to make a character a little bit more true to his own acting style, and I think it was fine. Like I didn't love it, but it worked better than I thought from the onset. But yeah, I don't know. I'm still kind of so-so in the film overall.
Yeah, I'm a pretty high B-. I think that it's mostly solid. It's just got some errors, some weird creative choices that I don't think work all that well. But I think, yeah, as a kids movie, it's got so many like little moments of charm. It's I think a satisfying little crowd pleaser of a Netflix movie. The fact that you can just pop it on Netflix, I think kids like it, and I enjoy the setting. I enjoy just sort of like probably the quick energy of the story. Like it doesn't dwell too long on anything. It kind of just moves at a pretty quick clip. So I'm a very, very tepid but ultimately enthusiastic fan of the movie. So B- for me. What about you?
I'm a little lower, but not terribly so. I'd give it like a semi-high C+, just because I think it's almost there. Like I said, the stuff that works, I do find amusing and charming. I do agree with you that maybe if I saw this in theaters, the like cheapness of the animation, the sort of plasticness of it, might have deterred me a little bit. There is at times I was kind of thinking like, is this an Illumination movie? And I had to remind myself that was Sony, because it did have kind of like an Illumination vibe at times. That was a little distracting, but overall, I mean, when it was bombastic and silly, I was with it. When it was trying to be a kind of more traditional family film narrative, I guess I just wasn't connected with it in the same way. Not to say that the moments like that are bad. It just didn't. I just felt like we've seen that enough to where the movie didn't really allow itself to push too far beyond that to really justify doing the story over again. But it's fine for what it is, especially as a Netflix film. I don't think it's going to be terribly offensive by any measures, but still ultimately left me with a bit of a shrug by the end.
Yeah, and in terms of animated films, I mean, the fact that I like this as much as I did seeing it right after watching Luca. And, I can't get into detail of what I thought of Luca, the new Pixar movie, but I have seen reviews of Luca that essentially are like, oh, it's kind of average. I'm like, no, it is. Average is this movie. This is average. Like, I think some people are kind of like, they have like these goggles on or something where they seem to think that like, a certain type of Pixar movie is the only one that's like a high quality, which I mean, come on, like I guess because we see so many of these animated movies, it's just, there's no comparison. I mean, like in terms of like the like how much effort, how much like constant rewriting and editing goes into the story of a Pixar movie versus, to me, I think sometimes these movies, like they just don't get that same amount of care and attention, which in the story department, which is regrettable because this has the potential to, I think, to be really, really, really good. I mean, it does have the limitation of being so slavish to Aladdin, and I think they know that, and they kind of have to lean into it. But otherwise, I mean, it's perfectly fine.
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, I would definitely watch Wish Dragon before I rewatched the most recent live-action Aladdin movie. So
yeah, same here.
Yeah, so that's a little feather in its cap, I guess.
All right, well, that is Wish Dragon. It's available to watch right now on Netflix. It is only 98 minutes long. Let's talk about another film here, Holler. Holler is a drama, kind of a small town indie drama written and directed by Nicole Riegel. This is her first film. And it stars Jessica Barden, the wonderful Jessica Barden, as well as Becky Ann Baker, Pamela Adlon, Gus Harper, and Austin Emilio. This was executive produced by Paul Feig, which I was very surprised by. I was not, expecting to see him. Yeah, I was like, oh, okay. What is this? What is this fun, wacky comedy we're about to get?
I think it's because the director worked with Paul Feig at one point. Like, I don't know if she was like a script supervisor or something. I think that's their connection, if I'm not mistaken.
I guess. I don't know. But this movie, this is being released by IFC Films in, I believe, limited release right now. I don't know if it's available on video on demand. I think you can just catch it in theaters, but it premiered at the Deauville American Film Festival in France last September, and then it literally screened at TIFF the next day, which is when you saw it at TIFF last year. And it also had a premiere, it was originally supposed to premiere at South by Southwest last March, but of course COVID happened, and so we're just now getting the film this month. Will, I know you talked about Holler a little bit on the show. I know that you reviewed it as well on cinemaholics.com, and you haven't seen it since. I just watched it, so this isn't going to be the meatiest review because I assume you don't remember too much. And I got to admit, I'm already sort of forgetting a lot of this movie. It is a movie that is doing a lot of things that we have been seeing over the last 5 years, right? And this is the part of the show where I kind of have to bring something up that it ruffles people's feathers. They don't like when we talk about politics. I get it. But this movie very much is invoking that sort of thing, so I have to bring it up. This movie very much feels like a reaction to the 2016 election. It literally is taking place during that time. It takes place in Ohio.
I mean, not only that, there's like a sequence where you hear on the radio Donald Trump, doing
that's how you know, right? So like there, in the background of this movie, there is like the 2016 election, and there is like this I don't know if revisiting, but there's this like sort of using of the fact like that jobs are disappearing in the Rust Belt, in this location especially. The movie frames like this town in Ohio as at times like a third world country, essentially, where lots of the people who live here are just in dire straits. They're losing jobs. Manufacturing jobs are being moved. People don't know where to go. They don't know what to do. There's just all this desperation. The movie isn't about that. That's the atmosphere, right? The movie's not about Trump or politicians or politics. It's really just about how all of that stuff sort of like exists, and it's like the least priority for these people, at least on the surface. To them, they're just trying to get by. They're just trying to like make a paycheck. And so this movie, it feels like it's trying to put a spotlight on these actual people and what they're going through, and how removed from other parts of America in general these people are. And in that way, I did think that's probably, for me, the most effective aspect about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've spent, because I went to school in Ohio, I've spent some time in the kind of more Rust Belt area of Ohio, not enough to be an expert by any means, but I do think when the movie's at its best, it does communicate that sense of environment, and like there's like the world building there where it feels vivid and raw, and you can like basically almost like taste the rust in your mouth as like you're walking through it. Almost, I mean, there are times where it does kind of lean into stereotypes, or it kind of feels like it's doing a very like sort, not Hollywoodized, but like it does kind of feel heightened for the sense of narrative purpose. But I generally think the movie is at its best when it is creating or evoking that sense of environment and getting us into the worldview of its characters and the environment that they live in. I think those are some of the best moments. I think those moments tend to happen early on in the film when we're establishing character and tone. When the movie is starting out, I'm like, oh, this might be really good. Like, it's starts off really strong. Jessica Barton, once again, very good. I think when the movie starts to fall apart is when the narrative actually kind of comes into play, and it does a lot of kind of tropey things that unfortunately we have seen several times before.
That's exactly, 100% where I'm at with it. It's like that, man, that first 30 seconds, first 30 minutes of this movie, it's so effective at setting up this world, making you understand the circumstances of Ruth's life. Ruth is Jessica Barton's character. She is in high school. Her older brother has been like her legal guardian for a while because her mother is addicted to opioids. So there's like the opioid crisis like looming over this thing. And they have like a family friend that they go to a lot who works in the factory. That's Becky Ann Baker's character, Linda. And all those characters, to me, they felt authentic. They felt real. They felt interesting. And yeah, when the narrative kicks in, it's sort of like, okay, Ruth has this issue where she needs to be able to pay for college. So she has to, do some dangerous things. And, she has to like kind of navigate the seedy underbelly of her small town, which is already pretty seedy, in order to get that goal. I think, though, where this movie does not work is that I really just did not find the connection to this character, her aspiration for college and the risks she has to take. They didn't really move me for some reason. I think that I just didn't connect with her. I didn't feel her plight in the way that the movie is trying to get across, as hard as it's trying to get that across. And despite Jessica Barton being such an engaging actor, I'm actually kind of perplexed why this movie doesn't work. It feels like it should. I think like on paper, this thing should be emotionally wrenching, and the end scene should fill me with all of this emotion. And ultimately it just didn't. It ended, and I kind of walked away from this film not feeling affected by it. And that's really bad for, for an indie drama. Like, you really got to nail that. And for whatever reason, it just didn't happen with this movie, which I'm really sad about. I really was hoping that it was going to have a real effect, but yeah, it just didn't for whatever reason.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to escape comparisons to something like Winter's Bone, which this movie is at least somewhat evocative of, and I think at its best it is capturing some of the great things that made that movie stand out and become such a hit. But I do think, as you're suggesting, I think the movie is at its best similar to how that movie was a great showcase for Jennifer Lawrence early on in her career. I did remember thinking, like, as a showcase for Jessica Barton, I think this is very strong. At the time when I saw it, I admittedly hadn't seen, The End of the Effing World and other things that she was a part of, except for like The Lobster and a few other side parts. So for me, I was just like, who's this great young actress that's, coming up on the scene, like this young, like early 20-something. And then I was surprised. I was just like, oh, she's like my age. And it's just like,
Yeah, she's almost 30.
Yeah. So, it just was definitely that surprised me. But I think outside of, like we were saying before with the Pink Sky Head thing, where I'm like, I hope she doesn't have to get settled to doing these high schooler parts for, the rest of her career. I would like to see more adult roles from her pretty soon. But I do think she does a terrific job, and I think she is able to make this movie ultimately work more than it doesn't. But it is just a shame that second half really kind of deflates like a lead balloon. I think when the crime aspects come into play, that's where the movie starts to shake. And I never really fully bought the crime underbelly aspects of the narrative. It felt very heavy-handed, and it even like the geometry of it didn't fully mesh with me. It kind of felt like it was kind of birding itself into the narrative in a way that felt like it was very scripted and very blunt. And that's a shame, because I do think when it is at its best, which as we suggested is like for the first like 30-40 minutes, there is a really strong, really compelling indie character drama here that even if it is playing into some stereotypes, it is generally pretty strong and gripping. But then just when that narrative comes in, it just doesn't quite stick the landing in a way that's just more frustrating than anything, because when it works, it does work.
Yeah, I mean, it's not for nothing. I mean, these actors are clearly giving it their all. I think Pamela Adlon, she's not in a lot of the film, but when she is, it's like I buy it. Like I don't see her. I see the character, and these are rich characters, you know, in one sense. Mm-hmm. But I just could not, as the narrative is going, I just did not find the direction of the narrative to have the right juice. Like it just didn't feel like the right conflict. I mean, how many times have we seen somebody who's like, they got to do unsavory things to make money to have a better life? That story's been done to death. And this movie just doesn't find a unique angle on it. And that's why the opening, I think, is better, because it finds a little bit of an angle. I mean, at least it kind of leans into the like very, very topical things, like, you know, the current events and like a very specific backdrop. But then it moves away from that stuff a little bit, because then it has to be this story of intrigue of like, is she going to do this? Is she getting a little bit too close to this character? And yeah, I just kind of was checked out by then, because I just thought that the narrative had lost its focus on what makes this character tick. And instead it just sort of became like, I got to do this, to do this, do this. Here's what happened, the end. And then just a little bit of a shame to see this kind of miss that opportunity to be a bit more, right? And I think that we have gotten other films that have like captured this kind of story in a more unique, engaging way. Something like Nomadland, honestly, which very different, but you mentioned Winter's Bone, you know, dealing with similar subject matter, but finding like just different ways to go about it, and finding different ways to capture the feeling of a world more effectively.
Yeah, and there's also a romance angle that's incorporated, romance, I guess, with quotation marks, that's incorporated, that I just found to be icky and kind of needless. I don't know how you felt about that aspect of it.
Yeah.
But
I was just like no point.
Yeah, no bueno.
Mayor of Easttown kind of does this sort of thing a little bit better, to be totally honest. I know you haven't checked that out yet.
Yeah.
But that's a show that's sort of about, you know, people trying to break out of this small town. And I don't know, like, I think what that show gets about these, it's not all bleak. Like, yeah, it's people are sad, people are struggling, but there is still like, kind of like In the Heights as well. It's like people are still living their lives, and they're fine. They're trying to make the best out of certain situations, and there's a balance. And I think because this film is just like so hardcore depressing, that's where I think it's like losing its energy. It just doesn't have life. It just doesn't have a way for us to connect.
Sure. And I will say, though, it is better than Hillbilly Elegy for whatever it's worth. Another Ohio-based rural town type narrative. But I agree with basically what you said there.
I'm a C+ on Holler. I wish it was better. I really wanted it to be stronger, and I kind of just, the more I've thought about the film, the less I've remember of it even, and the less I really just had much to praise here. So it's C+. I mean, it's not terrible or anything. It's competent enough, but yeah, it just didn't really resonate with me.
Man, I tried, John. You know, I was just like, yeah, it was pretty good when I saw it at TIFF, but you were just like, oh man, we got to cover this movie. And I was like, yeah, you know, John, I mean, I think you'll like it fine. And then, you know, we get to this point, and your expectations had been set too high, I guess. That's probably my fault in some respect.
I knew you didn't love it. I mean, come on.
Sure.
I mean, I will say my expectations were a little bit painted, because a friend of the show, Isaac Feldberg, loves this movie. And I know Matt Zoller Sites, you know, on RogerEbert.com gave it 4 stars. Oh, wow. And I don't get it. I don't understand. But, you know, to each their own, of course.
I mean, like I said, for those like first like 40 minutes, I mean, I was like B plus A minus territory on it. I was just like, this is really compelling. I love the look of the film. I love how it gets us in this world. This performance from Jessica Barden's great. It's just that once it goes along, it kind of gets, as it goes along, it goes from like B plus to like C plus at the end. So I'm gonna split the difference and say I think it's ultimately like a B minus film. Like I didn't mind the time I spent with it. It was my first film at the virtual TIFF, and I didn't feel like it was like a bad start to the festival. I just felt like there was a stronger, more compelling film that they constantly just didn't explore, and it just kind of felt like they took a lot of like safer, less interesting choices throughout that were ultimately for the worse instead for the better. So a film I ultimately liked, but one I felt like I could have easily loved if it was just a little bit better.
All right. Well, if you want to see the film for yourself and decide, it is, I believe, in theaters and limited release. It's just 90 minutes long. So our next film is Censor, which is a Sundance film that we checked out this past year. And we haven't rewatched it, so I don't know if we'll have too much to say about it, but we did want to bring it up since it is now hitting release. This is a British horror film that stars Prano Bailey, or was directed by Prano Bailey Bond. It was written by Anthony Fletcher. And it stars Neem Algar, who we remember from The Last Rites. She was also one of the main character in Raised by Wolves, and she had like a little bit of a role in Wrath of Man. She plays a character named Enid, who watches these video nasties. It was this thing like in the 1980s where directors were really like pushing the limits of like what you could put on like VHS. Just like really gross movies, like very gory, just stuff that is just like super messed up. And it's a very, very unique time of film.
Heavy exploitation era for especially horror. Yeah.
Our main character Enid is a film censor. And one of the most interesting things about this movie, I think, is just kind of like showing what that's like in this time period. You know, like the people who have to like watch these movies day in, day out, and they have to give these films a rating, and they have to be like, okay, you can't actually put this on VHS. It can't be in like a rental store unless you take this scene out or you change this about the movie, because there's this danger. There's this like sense that, or like I guess kind of like a night, what's the word? Nightcrawler kind of exploitation thing there, where like people will see these films and then replicate what they see on screen. Right, where like the violence, like there's like media reports or media sensationalism, where people are like, oh, you know, this guy watched this video nasty and then he murdered his whole family. It's like stuff like that. And the movie's sort of like about blurring the lines between what's real, what's fiction, what's a film. And its main character is a censor who is just like constantly filling her head with this stuff. And it almost sort of like, I think my issue with the movie is like, it's too black and white, I think, on that, because it's sort of proving that these video nasties were doing that in a very explicit way, because Enid, as she's watching these films, starts to like lose sense of what's real. There's this whole thing where her sister disappeared at one point when they were kids, and she's sort of like blurring that with these films she's seeing. She eventually believes that this director is responsible for something. And then, I don't know, the movie's last like 30 minutes are very weird and abstract. And I respect this movie. I respect its atmosphere, its film aesthetic, what it's trying to say in a very general sense. But I think its execution is really sloppy. And it's odd, because I really wanted to like this more. I think that it's solid. And I think that like anybody who's a fan of video nasties and like film history, and they're interested in like this time period, and they like horror films, this is an easy watch. I mean, an easy recommend, I should say. And it's got aspects of Videodrome that are really fun. And like, you know, there's all kinds of things in here people can grasp onto if they like that aesthetic. But everybody else, if you don't like that sort of thing, I wouldn't bother with this.
Yeah, I mean, I guess similar to you and similar to Holler, as we were discussing earlier, I was pretty with it for the first half or so. I really liked the period designs of it, the way that's nostalgic without being like cumbrously nostalgic, in a way that's like it's able to kind of focus on the character and this work environment that we rarely ever see in films. I really love the look of the film. I'm trying to remember, was it shot on like 16 or 35 millimeter? Or did it just kind of look like 16.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
But I thought it looked great, and I did really like the lead performance here. I just think the thing that doesn't quite work is the script, which, as you're suggesting, rather ironically, is kind of restricted to this sort of like moralistic point of view that isn't really as inquisitive or as intriguing as it should be given the material. And the fact that it has this kind of like heady conversation about the moral virtues of these films, and if they have a negative impact on cinema and society as a whole, I felt like there was more room for an interesting conversation to be had. But the movie itself kind of, it goes in this weird and I guess somewhat understandable exploitation-esque direction towards the end, where it is like trying to mirror the aesthetics of like something that's a little bit more avant-garde and a little bit more subversive, but weirdly those moments feel oddly kind of tame and just don't really have the bite of the earlier moments, which are a lot more a little bit toxic, I guess, or in a good way. Like they're asking some kind of tough questions. They're exploring some really kind of messed up territory in a way that, you know, is evocative of Videodrome, and clearly that's also the case of the end of the film. But I just don't think it has that balance in a way that is truly effective. It just feels like it's a close but no cigar film. But one I ultimately, like I said before, I like the beginning of the film enough to I think I would recommend it, but it just feels like a lighter recommendation that I would give it compared to how I was feeling towards the beginning of the film.
Yeah, that I'm exactly where you're at. And I will say that my estimation of it has probably grown since I've seen it. And I kind of went from being like, I think because this came in the middle of Sundance, you know, and it was one of the first Sundance films I saw. So I guess not the middle, but in terms of like, because we also had the screeners. I just remember really not being taken with it, and I was pretty harsh on it initially. I think I gave it like a 2.5 stars, but I think I'm leaning more toward like 3 stars, honestly, and so more of like a B-. I just think that I do want to appreciate what this movie gets right, which is the sort of like attention to the time period, the details, you know, not just Cronenberg, but also, you know, Argento and Brian De Palma, you know, and just like feeling like such a great tribute to those directors, and just like a time when video nasties, like, there's like a scene here, for example, where they're in a rental store and she kind of goes up and like there's like the forbidden section, right? You know, where you have to kind of like talk your way to getting a film that isn't allowed to be out there. I know there's like fun little moments like that made me a little nostalgic, you know, without, kind of to what you're saying, it wasn't cumbersome about it. Like I didn't feel like the film was like hitting me over the head with that sort of like aesthetic. And I really got to give it to Nia Malgar. I really like this actress. I think that she has like such an understated energy to her performances. Like sometimes I just watch her and I don't see her as like, you know, I don't see like her other performances at all. She just kind of like disappears into the role, which I know a very stereotypical thing to say for a film critic, but I mean, I think that she definitely has that gift.
Yeah, she is an actress, of course, yes.
Yes, she's good at it. That's what I'm trying to say.
She's good at acting, yes.
She's good at acting. I think that, to be more specific, I think there are actors who disappear into their roles, but almost too much, like Sienna Miller. There's this ongoing thing where like, I don't know what Sienna Miller looks like. I've seen so many movies with Sienna Miller in it, but I could be watching a movie and I won't know it's her until the credits, even though I've seen like 10, 20 films from her. Sure.
That's how I feel about Andrea Rosenborough, or what's her name from Possessor?
No, yeah. Hard disagree.
You can't. I always feel like she looks like different every film.
She looks different, but I know it's her. That's what I'm saying about Nia Malgar. Like they're actors who look different, but you know it's them. That's kind of what I'm trying to say inelegantly.
Yeah, well, that's why I think we're on the same page then with Andrea Rosenborough. I think. I don't know.
Well, I thought you were saying Andrea Riseborough is like kind of like a Sienna Miller, where you don't know it's her, and like definitely not.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it depends on the film. Like sometimes I'll forget it's her just because, like, I mean, she looks different. She does a different energy for each performance. But I think in recent years, now I'm kind of getting that vibe that you're talking about.
What I'm more saying about Sienna Miller is that it's not that I forget it's Sienna Miller. It's that I don't know it's her in the first place.
Okay.
So like she's in the movie, I see her, and I'm like, who's that? And then I see in the credits, oh, it's Sienna Miller. I had no idea.
Okay, I guess we just disagree then on Serena. What's her name?
Sienna Miller.
Sienna Miller. Yeah.
I guess we disagree. I don't know.
I don't know, because I never really like forget it's her. I don't know.
This is a
I
weird
don't,
conversation.
sure. I don't know where we're going with this, but Censor.
Yes, it's a stylish vintage horror film, and I think that it's for a certain type of film fan. I'm going to give it a B- just because a very, very low B-, because I think what it actually is trying to be for a certain type of audience is satisfying. Unfortunately, yeah, the last scene, the third act, it's not great, but I think that you'll still have a bloody good time up until that part. And yeah, I give it a really, really, really soft recommendation for that kind of horror fan, because you know who you are if you like those kinds of films. And it'd be sad if you missed this, because I could see people really, really liking this purely because they get so much of like the squishy Cronenberg stuff that they like about his filmography. So yeah, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I would say 2/3 of film, I was like in B, maybe even B+ territory, because I was really liking everything that you were praising. I felt it was really interesting. It had a unique point of view, but then while it never loses entertainment value, there is like a kind of like finger wagging quality to the last act of the film that, I don't know, it just kind of rubbed me the wrong way when I saw it. It just didn't, it felt like the wrong way to lead the film. It left a sort of like bitter aftertaste that ultimately gave me a little bit more of a negative perception of film once I had finished it, in a way that I found disappointing, because it was just like everything about it leading up to it was pretty good, and it was able to avoid such a kind of like simplistic moral view of this material that I was really engaged with it. I thought I was doing a lot of things right, and I was won over by the direction and stuff like that, but I just don't think it sticks that landing in a way that it does bring it down a little bit. Not enough to where I think it tampers a film or it becomes a bad film, but similar to Holler, it just feels like it just kind of like the lead comes out of the balloon a little bit, and it just is like, oh, well, you had something better here. It just didn't quite find that landing that you were hoping for, but ultimately a decent rental if you can find it.
All right, well, that is Censor. Yeah, we weren't the biggest fans, but you can catch it right now. I believe it is in limited release, and I think it's going to be on VOD next week, so you can check that out. It's coming out from Magnet Releasing, and it's just 84 minutes long. It's a quick watch, so if you don't like it, it's not like you'll be stuck with it for too long. But all right, The Misfits. The Misfits is a heist film, and I don't know why we're talking about this movie at this point. I know why we're talking about it.
Yeah,
we were looking at the yeah, we saw it. I mean, there were screeners. It happened. But like, I looked at this lineup. I looked at this cast: Pierce Brosnan, Jamie Chung, Tim Roth, Nick Cannon, Mike D'Angelo, Hermione Corfield, who I am championing, I'm cheering on, especially since Sea Fever, that little underrated gem from last year. I saw this cast and I was like, yeah, come on. How could this be terrible? I could see it being average. I could see it being like whatever. I could see it being a lot of fun. And it's not. This is one of the worst movies of the year. I really just walked away from this being like, what in the world did I just watch? Why is this as bad as it is? I was telling you after I saw it, this does not happen often, because I don't consider myself, I've never directed a film in my life. And sure. I don't consider myself good at many things. I walked away from this thinking I could have done a better job directing this film. And I'm telling you, I'm not that egotistical. Probably, I mean, a little egotistical, I suppose, but I really walked away from this being like, I would have done something different here. And that's not great. It's directed by Rennie Harlan, and it's written by Robert Henney and Kurt Wimmer. I don't know what they were writing. I think they were two different movies and then cut and pasted the whole thing together. But yeah, you're gonna say?
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, you were listing off the cast and you were like, where did this go wrong? And I was gonna be like, well, the title card directed by Rennie Harlan came up, and that's where you know things went wrong. Not to say that I don't think Rennie Harlan's like, some people kind of call him like a hack, and like, you know, they are very disparaging of him. I don't think he's necessarily awful. I just think he's kind of in that like Joel Schumacher thing where like he just has more misses than hits, and then like as his career went along, it just kind of became pretty much misses. You know, like,
it's like not typecasted but type directed, I guess, whatever that is.
I guess I don't know if it's just that he got like lazy, or if he just like kind of like his style of filmmaking, which is like kind of definitely more of like a late 80s early 90s vibe, just kind of fell out of fashion, and he just kind of just shrugged his shoulders and just was like, I'll just make what I can make. I'm not quite sure what happened, but like, I mean, I know a lot of people really like the long Goodnight, I think it's what it's called, with like Samuel
Long Kiss
Jackson.
Goodnight.
Long Kiss Goodnight, that's it. I know some people are big fans of his second Die Hard film, stuff like that, but yeah, just in recent years, he did that like the other Hercules movie, the one with
The Legend of Hercules from 2014.
He did that one. There was some other stuff he did recently that was just very disposable garbage.
Yeah, he
basically.
did something called like Legend of the Ancient Sword. It was like based on a video game. Yeah,
if you say so.
I think his most recent film was Bodies at Rest, which was like a.
That sounds like something I'd find at Redbox at 3 a.m. and
it's a Chinese language film, like Skip Trace.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It came out in Hong Kong, I think, and I don't even know if it had a US release, to be totally honest with you.
Okay. Bodies at Rest sounds like a Steven Seagal movie, though, like a late period Steven Seagal film.
Yeah. It's like Body of Lies, Bodies at Rest. What are you gonna do? Yeah. I'm not a fan. I've seen a few of his films. I Deep Blue Sea, famously my first R-rated film in the theater.
Oh, that's a fun film. Yeah, that's fun.
It has its moments. I mean, I have a connection to that film that defies logic. I know some people kind of like 12 Rounds, the John Cena film.
Not me.
Yeah, it's like a very like, oh yeah, I'll watch it if it's on. Like also like The Covenant, that has like a very, very quiet fan base, I guess.
Sure.
People were like, oh yeah, that's okay.
That's the kind of fan base where like people are like kind of whispering like, I kind of like The Covenant. Do you like The Covenant? And like,
yeah, exactly.
1 out of 5 people will be like, oh yeah, no, that's kind of fun. Like, right? I haven't seen it myself. I have no opinion of the film.
But then if somebody's like, oh yeah, and then you're like, oh God, thank goodness.
Yeah.
And that is how Will and I met.
Yeah, I've not seen it. I don't know. I mean, I've heard it's a very, I guess, frisky movie. Like it's like kind of like horny. But I don't know if that's true.
Heck yeah, very homoerotic.
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of alluding to.
Yeah, Taylor Kish was in that, right? Sebastian Stan. Important. It's a formative film, I think, for a lot of people.
Oh, okay, I missed it. I did not catch it in my teenage years, I'll admit. But
it came out at the right time for me. I was like 16 when it came out, so I was like me and the boys rolled up to the theater.
6 for The Covenant, please. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Harry Potter, forget that noise. That's for kids. That's for babies.
Yeah.
we got our own Order of the Phoenix right here.
Yeah. I think it would be funny if you like snuck into it, but it was like a PG-13 film, so you like didn't need to sneak into it. Like you bought tickets for Harry Potter, and then like they found like you could have just bought. It's a PG-13 film.
Yeah. We know because like the usher is like one of our friends.
Right.
Yeah. It's Will.
Yeah.
All right. Well.
Anyway,
the reason we're not talking about the Misfits is because we don't like that movie. And this is more fun to talk about, honestly. I mean, what do you want to say about the Misfits? I mean, what is there to say?
It's like a dollar version of The Losers, which it's in and of itself is like a dollar version of Ocean's 11, basically. So like, I mean, I think it's fun to see Pierce Brosnan, late period Pierce Brosnan in a starring role. I think he's charismatic enough that he can carry a film, but he just really doesn't have much to do here. Like he tries. I mean, it's not like he's like slumming it per se, but it doesn't feel like he really knows what he wants to do. So he's just kind of like playing like James Bond at like 40%, basically.
Yeah, it really feels like the direction was so vague. It was just like, all right, be charming. And he's like, okay, I'm like an amazing actor, right? I don't just have to just do whatever you want. You're Irish, right? Do an Irish accent here, but then lose the Irish accent later.
I think that was just more like as the shoot went along, he just didn't really care, and he was just
probably.
But
poor Jamie Chung, by the way. I don't think she's been this I don't think she's been this disillusioned by saying yes to a project since maybe Dragon Ball Evolution. I mean, Hollywood does not understand what they have with Jamie Chung, and I think like Lovecraft Country kind of showed. She is a great performer. I do not understand. She was good and casual, and she only had like a few scenes in that show.
Yeah, I mean, what I was going to say about Jamie Chung was that like even if the movie is constantly trying to downplay it, she has such a natural star presence that I feel like she makes the movie inherently more interesting just by her involvement. Like this isn't like her like giving a great performance or anything, but like because she is clearly like a star that can't be a star because Hollywood, like you said, doesn't know what to do with her. She is like, her scenes are obviously like usually way more fun and interesting than anything else in the film, just because she can make him interesting just by nature of being herself, basically. But then we have like people like I think Tim Roth's kind of fun as a villain. He doesn't really get much to do either. But then you have like Nick Cannon, who is just I don't have anything against Nick Cannon. He's fine. I
mean, I've heard he's a bit of a awful person.
Yeah, he's a bit of a
life.
Yeah, there was that whole like anti-Semitic thing that was not great.
He's had like 20 kids with like different women. There's a whole thing about that.
All right, well, we don't really need to get into his personal life.
He's a bit of a ladies' man,
Sure.
but like he's a bit of a cheater. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Well, in any case, focusing on the work, it feels like the movie really wants you to be charmed by Nick Cannon, and there have been times where he is charming, like in Drumline and stuff, but this movie, he just is like, it's just a tedious performance.
Yeah, he's trying to be like a Fast and Furious character, and he doesn't have like the direct. I don't know. He doesn't have the writing to really make that happen.
Yeah,
his narration in this movie is so it's like nails on a chalkboard. Like I can't believe how badly written it is, how badly performed it is by him. And it's not that I think that he can't do it. It's not that I think Pierce Brosnan and Jamie Chung and all like Tim Roth. It's not that I don't think that they can deliver these lines. It's that Rennie Harlan is like one taking this entire thing, and he's just not like, I don't know, just doesn't seem to have the patience as a director to get the scene right. And so like that's why it feels like a patchwork of first attempts.
Right, because he's like Nick Cannon's just kind of relying on his like history as a sketch comedy star, like from earlier in his like Nickelodeon years.
Sure.
And that's basically what he's like kind of relying on. But yeah, I can kind of see what you mean. Like it almost kind of feels like he's like trying to like audition for Fast and Furious as like maybe like a co-star, and it feels like this is his attempt at it. And if it is, then sorry, bud.
Yeah, I mean, like what reminds me of the Fast and Furious thing, mainly like Tyrese's character, right? Where he's trying to be this like vulnerable, like hard ass guy where he's like, oh, I'm tough, but he has a soft side. You know what I mean? Like it feels very reminiscent of like several characters from that franchise. And so I think like ultimately, like in this movie, it's a mess because like, I don't know, walking away from this movie, I have no idea. Like the whole premise here is that these are like Robin Hood characters. They are specifically pulling off heists and stealing from terrible people, but they're not doing it for their own benefit, which, that's kind of interesting, I think. I don't think that's like a bad way in for a movie, but like there's this whole central conflict of trying to get Pierce Brosnan's character to buy in and help them with something. So all of these scenes take place in like the Middle East, and the way that they sort of like connect him to the plot is, well, his daughter is involved, Hermione Corfeld's character, who weirdly enough is like, I think like one of the biggest afterthoughts in this movie, and one of the better performances, actually, I thought. Like there weren't as many times where I was like, oh, that was really badly delivered. I think she actually was probably doing a better job.
I actually thought her stuff with Pierce Brosnan was kind of sweet. Not like enough to save the movie, but like it made it a little bit more palatable. But I mean, that's a very mild bit of a what's the word? That's a mild kind of pat on the back, I guess. Just like that wasn't terrible.
Yeah, like a consolation,
Sure, I think that's the word I was looking for. Yeah, consolation,
something like that.
Yeah.
Tim Roth. I mean, you have to make your bad guy intimidating. You have to make him interesting, and I think there are rules to a heist film. It's like if you make a heist film, you have to have these moments. For example, where the heist goes wrong. Or at least like it goes wrong, but that was supposed to go wrong, or you have to improvise or whatever. And this movie, it's only an hour and a half. And I knew we were in trouble when like we were getting up, there was only like 30 minutes left. And I think the heist had just started. I was like, we spend so much time setting it up and trying to get Pierce Brosnan to show up, and then trying to get the father-daughter relationship established. And we got to squeeze in this like super forced romantic subplot, and we got to do all these things. And then the heist happens, and it's so boring. The heist is probably, for me, was the most boring thing about this movie. I didn't care at all. And it's probably because it comes so late in the movie, I was so checked out. I don't understand. How do you make a heist film? Like heists are so easy to make entertaining. They're hard to write. Like it's hard to make a heist really come together. But I don't know, like if the heist in Community, which was like, what, 10 minutes? Like if that has more tension and suspense and heart and character than your, I don't want to say big budget movie, but they had a budget and they truly were trying to make this like a big theatrical film. I think, I don't know what else to say. It's absurd.
Yeah, I mean, it's very obviously trying to mimic the Ocean 11 model where it's just riding on its cool factor, which obviously worked really well for Ocean's 11. And with this movie, it's just not organically cool. It just has this very kind of try-hard energy to it that is just by design not going to be cool because it's trying so hard to be cool that it just becomes this kind of tedious slog to sit through because it's just like, it's just a lot of posturing, basically. It's just like a movie trying to like strut stuff without having the stuff to really warrant it. But like, there obviously, like we said, like there are stars in here that could, in a better script or under better direction, make this work. It's just that like we said, like Pierce Brosnan doesn't really, he's just kind of like, not half-assing it, he's a professional, but he's just like kind of just like shrugging his shoulders and being like, all right, yeah, I'll just make the most of this. And Tim Roth is just kind of hamming it up, but not fully. And then Nick Cannon's just in a whole other movie, and then everyone else just kind of for themselves. And yeah, it becomes not a fun time.
How many sequels do you think this is going to get?
Oh, 7.
At least?
Yeah, maybe 10.
I'm a D+ on the Misfits. It's trash.
I'm a C-. I'm not as negative on it just because, like, I mean, we haven't mentioned this is basically a commercial for Abu Dhabi. At least
100%. There's literally a whole scene.
Yeah.
It's like straight out of like it feels like a commercial.
Right.
It's hilarious.
But I'll admit that, like, it's fun to, even in like a movie fashion, go to Abu Dhabi. And I think those moments are a little bit more naturally fun just because the movie has like less stakes and it's just actually trying to be like a fun time in Abu Dhabi. I just think, like you said, like the heist is just like weirdly very disinteresting. It's just it just doesn't have a lot going for it. It's just not an interesting heist by design, and we just don't really care about these characters enough to really have a lot of suspense or tension built from their heisting. So yeah, I mean, I didn't hate it as much as you did, but I cannot defend this movie by any stretch of the imagination.
I think I'm mainly disappointed because I do not want this film to inhibit the career of Hermione Korfeld, because
I doubt it will.
I don't think it will, but I mean, I've been disappointed before. I want to say she has another movie coming out that I think they're filming it right now called The Road Dance, and so I don't know anything about that movie, but I know it's going to come, and I hope that it is much, much better than this. That is the Misfits. We're not fans, and but we watched it. We watched it for you. It's just 94 minutes long. I think it's only available in theaters right now. I don't know how many theaters because I don't see it playing anywhere in my area. If it is, I just haven't come across it. So
it looks like it's playing in one theater near me, but like for like one showing. So
as a lark,
Yeah, just like, oh yeah, we can play whatever. Yeah, the Misfits, whatever.
But you get there and you're like, all right, 6 for the Misfits, please. And it's like,
yeah,
we're not really playing the Misfits.
Yeah. Well, the joke I was gonna make is that they thought it was like a concert documentary, like, oh, you made a movie about the Misfits? Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
I love that band.
The theater manager is like, oh yeah, we'll play that, of course.
Yeah. It's like, oh, Pierce Brosnan, that's an odd choice for. Hey, wait a minute.
All right. Well, that's it for our show this week. Thank you so much for listening to Cinemaholics. We'll be back next week to talk about Luca and hopefully Sparks Brothers, Rita Moreno, all this other stuff that's going to be coming out. Hitman's bodyguards, wives, cousins, brothers, uncles, whatever that is.
Sure.
All next week. Be sure to connect with us on social media. As usual, Facebook, Twitter. And again, our email is cinemaholics@gmail.com. And signing off from the Internet California, I'm John Negroni.
And for Internet Pennsylvania, I'm Will Ashton.
See you next time.